You started your journalistic career, I believe, or almost started it at the Washington Post, and you have a marvelous anecdote in the introduction about being assigned as the police blotter reporter.
You bet.
And you dutifully got over there at the right time. There were no lights on.
Oh, no. I showed up at the cop shop thinking what was called the press room, great euphemism. And I thought that, Clark Gable would be there and Claudette Colbert and there would be kind of Leo McGarry or something and
people you loved and admired.
And they would be speaking, with that kind of wised up martinied way, and be lots of smoking and so on, and poker games. And I got there and there was no lights on, and I flipped on the light, kind of this fluorescent light buzzed into existence, and there was this guy sleeping on a gunmetal gray desk under his overcoat, and he whipped off the overcoat and he announced that he was the police reporter for the Washington Times, which is owned by the Reverend Sung Myung Moon. And he offered me a beer. He seemed to have had an inexhaustible supply of beer, Pabst Blue Ribbon.
Pabst.
And he told me that he lived...
Listen, that's good beer.
You bet, especially warm. and he announced that, I said, well, where do you live? Trying to make conversation at midnight or whatever it was. And he said that he lived in his car. And his car was a vintage Cadillac hearse, which may be the best metaphor for the reporting business I've ever heard.
There was a great leader in the reporting business, if you will, Katharine Graham.
Well, I have gotten so preposterously lucky, and the great stroke of luck that anybody walked into with the Washington Post are the two people that made the Washington Post. The Washington Post was a terrible, mediocre newspaper, at least years and years ago.
Number 3 in a 2-paper town.
It was awful. And Katharine Graham, who came to this job by the horrible circumstances of her husband's suicide, inherited the job of running the paper. And one of the first things she did, or eventually did, was hire Ben Bradley to be her editor, and those two became the real titans of the Washington Post and symbols of all that is aggressive, tough, and fair in American journalism. And I think their inheritors have done quite well. Len Downey as editor and Don Graham as publisher. But a publication needs that ethos, that direction, that backbone and spine in order to function and do well.
The amazing part is if you look at her life prior to the suicide of her husband, and somewhere you used the phrase that she considered herself a second-class citizen.
Yeah, she first of all, she was a woman, and in those days, women were not executives. They were, in Katharine Graham's world, she was raised to become a Washington hostess of a great and the wife of a great man, and everybody
which she was.
And everybody thought that Philip Graham was going to be a great man and a great publisher, but he had many problems, not least his mental illness, which led to suicide. She was not prepared for this job, or thought she wasn't, and yet she made the right decisions at the right time, and they were very tough. Beginning with not just hiring Bradley, but standing behind her editors and publishing the Pentagon Papers, supporting Woodward and Bernstein during Watergate, when, by the way, not only was the Nixon White House aggressively against the Washington Post and making all kinds of threats, but other publications thought they were out on a limb and foolish.
One of the things that you get into as kind of a postscript to that article is the state of print journalism today, the effect that the internet has on it, the inability when they go on the internet to make money from the internet, and so forth. And it's a kind of sad postscript.
I think the internet's a great thing, in all the obvious ways, as this kind of incredible tool that has such amazing uses, whether it's all the books that are going to be on and available and searchable in all the ways that we already use it through Google and other search engines. The difficulty is reporting requires resources, deep, aggressive reporting, foreign reporting, investigative reporting, national and local reporting. You can't do it on the cheap. And therefore, you need a healthy business behind you to work. And you've got to, if the internet's going to be the distribution as opposed to chop down trees That's fine. But how are you going to make a developed business out of it? That's the challenge, I think, for proprietors coming up.
There's something else needed, which you get to, I think, at the very end of this postscript. During Watergate, you write, Katharine Graham was prepared not only to publish and support her reporters, but also to protect them by every means available to her. Her values, as well as her courage, seem increasingly endangered.
They do, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that fewer and fewer owners are around. The stock market makes demands for profit margins on media companies that are crazy, and therefore, what do? They fire and then things get worse.